Hello and welcome to Health Matters on Channels Television. Thanks for joining us. I am Mary Alale Yusuf. People usually talk about malaria and typhoid fever in the same breath, but these two diseases are very different from each other. Typhoid fever is caused by the Salmonella typhi bacterium. Symptoms could be mild or severe and typically show up 1 to 3 weeks after exposure, with fevers sometimes as high as 39 to 40 degrees centigrade. According to the World Health Organization, as of 2019, an estimated 9 million people get sick from typhoid, and 110,000 of them die from it every year. Typhoid fever is common among children in less developed countries. My guest is a family physician and Vice President and Director of Strategy of Medical Initiative for Africa. Dr. Agbo Ebuta joins us from our studio in Abuja. You're welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start by asking you, how exactly do people get typhoid fever?
Okay, it's transmitted fecal-orally. But to encapsulate that matter, I would say that anybody that has typhoid has eaten feces. And yes, you heard me right. Feces is the primary source of typhoid, the original source, because typhoid, as pertains to man and humans generally, is only found in humans. Humans are the only confirmed carriers of typhoid. Salmonella enterica, the one that is of clinical importance. So anybody who has typhoid has eaten feces in one form or another. So most times what happens is that people who are carriers, our brethren and compatriots who have typhoid lying in their intestines, that is their small intestines primarily, would pass this in their stool. And in the scenario commonly is through open defecation. So through open defecation, feces are indiscriminately deposited from where the contaminated water bodies and food sources, or some people will wash their food sources with contaminated water bodies, and then tiny amounts of salmonella are carried unaware to people in the public who, when they consume contaminated water, become infected or consume contaminated food. Or an also common scenario is when people visit the toilet or go to pass feces, and then when they pass stool and they try to clean themselves, their hands are contaminated with disinfective agent, and somehow inadvertently they shake hands, they prepare food or some other things, and somehow it contaminates water and food.
Wow.
Okay. Absolutely. So once the bacteria gets into the mouth, it travels down into the stomach. Interestingly, the body has a mechanism where most of these bacteria are dissolved and destroyed in the stomach, because the stomach is very acidic. But some of these bacteria are able to overcome this resistance and find their way down the intestine, where they settle down, start multiplying, and from there the story changes. So the main source is it is a fecal-oral transmitted disease, and the principal cause of this is open, indiscriminate defecation, and especially in our scenario in Nigeria.
I hear you.
Yes.
But salmonella does remind me of bacteria from raw chicken. Is there any connection?
Absolutely. There are over 2,500 serovariants, that is subtypes of salmonella. So the one that is principally responsible for enteric fever, that is typhoid fever, is only found in humans. However, out of the 2,500, it is only 4 of these subtypes that are found in humans. The remaining 496 are found in the environment, in fish, in chicken, in other animals. So yes, indeed, there are other serotypes that are important in infection, but they may cause simple conditions like diarrhea, stomach problem, vomiting, but they do not cause the clinical ailment that is designated enteric fever or typhoid fever. So they may cause mild gastroenteritis, that is mild diarrhea, but they do not cause the significantly life-threatening typhoid fever to a large extent. So yes, chicken is a source of certain types of salmonella, but these salmonella are not the etiological agent for typhoid fever or paratyphoid fever, which is strictly blamed on only 4 subtypes of the Salmonella enterica, which are Salmonella enterica typhoid, type E, paratyphi A, B, and C. Outside this, other paratyphoid, other Salmonella species may cause some symptoms, but not enteric fever or parenteric fever.
Okay, you say this one is human beings are the only hosts of this particular bacterium. That means that
confirmed.
If we want to, if we're serious, we can eliminate this thing.
100%.
Okay. So why are we like
100%,
this?
because, well, it's interesting, but it's not surprising that in most civilized environments, in like some places where they have an established fixes disposal system, they have waste treatment plants that are properly connected to homes, and open defecation is not a common practice. It means that you may have solved more than 70% of the risk of transmitting typhoid fever. However, in our country, Nigeria, as of 2021, was documented to have at least 50 million persons practicing open defecation. When you put this number against the estimated 400 to 500 million people practicing open defecation globally, you can see that Nigeria contributes 10% to this number. So it's significant, wow. It's a significant
that's
problem.
A lot.
And yes, that's a lot. And very important is to understand that it is driven by poverty. So within the country, in sub-regions where you have a significant amount of poverty, ignorance, some form of illiteracy, and lack of awareness, and low commitment to public infrastructure, funding for health systems and primary health care in certain parts of our country, prevalence of typhoid fever is much higher. So if you compare certain values, there are states in this country where prevalence is 2%, as low as 2%, and we have data to suggest that there are certain states where prevalence is more than 20%. These can be tied to funding, ignorance, open defecation practices, and access to safe water, including personal
lack of running water is an issue.
Yes, it is a confirmed issue. If you do not have safe running water, you will end up going to fetch water from other sources. Other sources will be what? Streams, water bodies, surface water bodies, and even open wells. Now, open wells are, especially if they are located within 30 meters of underground septic tanks or waste collectors or feces collectors, there is a high risk of contamination of those well sources because of the proximity within 30 meters. That is why in public health, a public health advice would be to space as much as possible underwater sources like wells far away from septic tanks. Also, when you have surface water bodies, which is the other option and access to where to where people source water, especially in our rural communities, you find out that upstream somebody is defecating and downstream somebody is fetching the water. People and it's a no-brainer. You cannot be defecating along a water body upstream and fetching water downstream from community to community, and you claim or expect that there will be no contamination. Definitely, there's going to be contamination.
So you mentioned diarrhea. We've
Yes.
spoken about fever and, one or two other things. Are there other symptoms we should know about? Maybe a few that will distinguish
yes, indeed.
it from malaria?
Oh, yes. I mean, it's very clearly different from malaria. It is more of an enteric problem. That is more of a problem that is focused around the stomach, yes, and the intestine. But from the stomach and the intestine, it can spread to every part of the body. And most times, in the first week, you have non-specific symptoms. You may just have things like malaria, headache, fever, body aches, and the rest. But by the second week of infection, you start having symptoms suggestive of a bowel infections like diarrhea, constipation, red spots around the stomach. And then by the third week, if unmitigated, in the absence of any intervention, it will spread. It can go to the brain. It can even present like psychiatric manifestations, abnormal behaviors, and abnormal speech. Absolutely.
When it
bleeding and
like,
all whatnot.
Does it actually damage the brain then?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Meningitis is infection of the coverings of the brain, and it has been documented that unmitigated typhoid in immune suppressed patients or susceptible patients can manifest as psychiatric conditions, and if not addressed, can leave artifacts and neurological deficits, and therefore can, of course, cause brain damage. If you have a patient
so
who, for
just
example,
a moment, doctor, I want to clear something
yes.
with you.
Yes, please.
Forgive me. We're talking about typhoid.
No problem.
But I heard you mention meningitis.
Absolutely. Typhoid can, so from the intestine, as the bacteria multiplies, causing constipation and diarrhea and abdominal pain and other things, the bacteria can flow into the blood. And once it flows into the blood, every part of the body is supplied by blood. So it can flow to the brain and cause infection in the brain, meningitis, or even encephalitis. So meningitis is infection of the covering of the brain, while encephalitis is infection of the brain matter. And this is possible. It can flow to the lungs and cause pneumonia. So you have patients manifesting with symptoms suggestive of inflammation in the lungs. It can flow to the bone and cause osteitis. That means an inflammation in the bone. And that can also manifest in the blood picture, where you have abnormal blood pictures like low blood levels, thrombocytopenia, if it's affecting the platelets or other cell lines. So yes, indeed, there is no system that is spared. And this is because the bacteria multiplies in the intestine, builds up to a certain level, finds its way to the blood, and once it hits the blood, there is no part of the body it cannot get to.
Why do people wait and die of this kind of thing with such violent reactions, if I may? I mean, we spoke of dying of it.
Yes, people do die of it because, like we said, prevalence in Nigeria for bacterial infection of typhoid in the stomach is about 16%. That puts it at about 32 million, at least, of our compatriots at any point in time. People wait for several reasons, for personal reasons, for community reasons, and then for general reasons. Access to health is a challenge. Most people would present in a chemist or in a pharmacist, or they will ask their neighbor or complain that they have this kind of problem to a large extent. Most Nigerians pay for health services out of pocket. In fact, to put a number on it, we will say 69.5% plus or minus pay for health services out of their pocket. And because of challenges with poverty and low access to funds, this is a disincentive for them to present in the hospital where they would get appropriate diagnosis. So they opt for other options, Doctor, traditional medications and all of that. Yeah.
Let us take a quick break. When we come back, some more questions about typhoid fever. Please stay with us. We're coming back in a moment. Welcome back. It's Health Matters on Channels Television, and we're talking about typhoid fever. learning a lot of new things too. Dr. Agbo Ebuta is with us in Abuja. Doctor, for those who do go, maybe for a test or to the hospital, we hear they do usually, typically, a malaria test, they do a Widal test. You go to the doctor and tell him you did a Widal test, I've seen it, and he's not impressed. Why?
The Widal test is a test that tries to identify an antibody. Okay. An antibody is your body's reaction to the presence of salmonella, apparently. So your body produces a chemical called antibody in the presence of salmonella. So the Widal test is not testing for salmonella. Okay. It's testing for that chemical and that antibody. Now, let me blow your mind. That antibody, its production can be caused by anything that looks like salmonella.
Okay.
And there are 2,500 salmonella subtypes that can infect man. Out of this number, only 4 can cause typhoid fever or paratyphoid fever. So only 4. So imagine you test positive to Widal test. That positivity suggests that you may have been exposed to any of the 2,500, out of which only 4 may have caused typhoid.
So what is the definitive test?
Okay, before the definitive test, let me also say that apart from those other types of salmonella that may give a positive Widal test but do not cause typhoid, even malaria. In fact, malaria is the #1 cause of false positive Widal test in Nigeria, because malaria prevalence in Nigeria is very high. You go to certain parts of the country, it's 70%. You go to other parts, it's 20%, and so on and so forth. Apart from that, immune response may cause that. Other infections, even simple intestinal infections that are not salmonella, may also cause that. So you can see there are multiple other causes of positive Widal test. So for you to say that you have diagnosed a patient with typhoid or paratyphoid fever, there are 3 steps. You must clinically evaluate your patient. Talk to your patient, find out the symptoms. The symptoms must be suggestive. Examine the patient to identify whether there are some physical telltale signs. And then when you come to test and diagnosis, you run tests that will identify the agent. Now, these tests are typically culture tests. Either you take a blood to culture, you take a stool to culture, or you do a bone marrow. The easiest and most convenient one, obviously, is to take a stool, which when you culture, after 2 days, it grows, the bacteria grows, and you can identify the precise antibiotic to use. Now, that is the proper care. That will avoid the over-bloated, over-diagnosis of salmonella or of typhoid, as we have it presently practiced, where people who have malaria are being treated for typhoid, people who have other salmonellas are being treated for typhoid, and people who have even immune problems are also being treated for typhoid. So you need to get a culture test, and the easiest one, of course, is stool test. But even when you get the stool test result, this has to be put together by your physician, your doctor, analyzed, and the precise antibiotic, the medication to use that would now fit your picture, your background, your sensitivity, your allergic history.
Is it different for different people?
And the correct duration to eradicate it. To a large extent, there are standard common antibiotics we use, but there are some people that you may need to avoid certain antibiotics. In fact, one of the commonest antibiotic group is called the fluoroquinolones, but there are certain indications, there are certain situations, some patients with seizures, some patients of certain age, some patients with some joint problems, some patients with some allergic background, some patients who have reacted to it in the past, some patients who have certain attributes which you have collected from taking a history from them. so that you can give what you call precision medicine, person-centered medicine, treatment that does not endanger the patient. And you treat at the correct dose, for the correct period of time, and at the end of the day, you do an evaluation. This will avoid under-treatment, emergence of resistance, like we have it now, where you can walk into virtually any pharmacy in Nigeria and get medications without prescription. That is driving high level of resistance. Even if you are properly treated with the properly identified antibiotic, you may not be treated for the correct duration, and that will lead to resistance. So they are multidimensional. It's a health system challenge as far as also a public health challenge, and it's something for us to incisively look into and develop a strategy and implement it for success.
You spoke about evaluation after treatment, but it's my experience that a lot of doctors don't give you a follow-up visit. They don't ask you to come back.
Well, the issue of coming back should be like a standard follow-up. You probably also, because just treating your patient is insufficient. So the standard, the training is that you should come back for follow-up. But I can explain that the pressure on the health system, a situation where you have one doctor to 10,000 Nigerians of our compatriots, has put an unimaginable pressure on the health system. So yes, securing doctors' appointment, rescheduling visits for standard follow-up has been a challenge. And because of this pressure on the health system, where as WHO recommends, 1 to 600 doctors. We presently have 1 doctor to 600 patients. We presently have 1 doctor to 10,000 patients. And so that is creating some challenge. So in addition to whatever we need to do, which would involve, of course, educating 50 million Nigerians who are presently still engaging in open defecation to disease, providing infrastructure, public infrastructure, and ensuring that even private infrastructure are properly built to avoid this menace. Also providing safe, sustainable, and accessible source of safe water, and ensuring that people are aware about hygiene and where to go to where they have symptoms and what to do, and access to healthcare. So it's a multidimensional intervention, but I don't think it's unachievable, because as Nigerians, we can achieve anything we set our minds to do with the right backing.
I was surprised to find out that there's actually a vaccine for it. How effective is this vaccine?
Absolutely.
And how is it dispensed?
Well, there are different vaccines. There are a couple of vaccines in the market. People have developed. The technology for vaccine development is not rocket science. Given the right equipment, environment, funding, this can be done. The vaccines that are available averagely can protect with a higher level of protection in the first 2 years especially. However, some others can protect for as long as 8 years. And of course, there are a few that they are being marketed as a single shot for life. But indeed, vaccine is very useful in prevention, but in certain scenarios. So for people who are visiting certain parts of the world, like the Indian subcontinent, where it is rife, certain parts of Southeast Asia, and then some parts of Africa, indeed, they are not immune. They may benefit from the use of vaccine. But for the general population, this condition is something that can be prevented by preventing open defecation and safe water sources. And emphasis should be focused on that. But there are some people that will benefit from vaccines. And then if you have people who have recurrent infections and all of that, they may benefit from vaccines. But the challenge would be that it would be driving focus from what we should be doing to what should be an addendum to the overall strategy. So the strategy would be to sort out open defecation, ensure safe water sources, and then early treatment so that we can eradicate. If we eradicate it to a large extent, protection will be better, because we have people who are carriers of this salmonella in their system, and they are a significant source. But if somebody is a carrier and he only stools in the toilet and there's a safe disposal of feces, the risk of transmission is significantly cut. So while vaccine is of critical importance, yes, vaccine is of critical importance and has a role to play, the focus is principally on educating our folks in all parts of Nigeria about open defecation and cut. Do you know that even in the FCT, open defecation is a problem? How much more in other regions that do not have access to the kind of facility?
It's not just a problem of the people, but it's it's political will that we are looking at now. It's kind of like an overhaul of how we live. Unfortunately, I hear that even if you provide some of these systems for the citizens, they are wary of using them, and they want to stay with their tried and trusted traditions, as it were.
You are 100% correct. So it's a way of life. It's a cultural thing. It's something they grow up to see and they are used to it. And it's something, and there's something called functional systems in the brain that drive certain patterns of behavior. But then indeed, many years ago in the West, where they were not developed, they had the same problem. In the Wild West in the Americas, they did not have proper
so change is possible.
System.
Well, on that note, Doctor,
so if
I really have to cut it here. Thank you so very much. I didn't think it was possible to learn so many new things about such a common ailment. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, viewers, for being with us. Have a wonderful day. I am Mary Alale Yusuf.